Greetings. My name's Dan Smith. I'm a professor of marketing at the Kelley School and also the former dean of the Kelley School and the former president of the Indiana University Foundation. And it's a delight to spend time with you right now. I've been here about 25 years, and one of the most wonderful things for all of us on the faculty is that our alumni keep in touch. It's a rare week that goes by that I don't get a phone call or an email from one of our wonderful alums, and they usually are just checking in to say hello and let me know how they're doing. But many times they call us, and this is true with all my colleagues too. They call and they have questions that they want to get some feedback on, some reflection on. And what's really interesting is when I talk to my colleagues, they've had the same experiences that I have had in many ways, in that the questions we get are not about technical business issues. Now, we get a few of those, gee, I'm thinking about, I'm leading an acquisition, how do I do something? Or I'm leading a team to launch a new product and we're trying to forecast demand. We will get some of those. But for the most part, the questions we get are about career management questions. Career, how do I handle a difficult boss? I'm thinking about changing jobs. How do I know if this is right? And so on and so forth. The list could go on for a while. But over the years, we've kind of collected a few of these and shared notes. And we thought, who better to share reflections with our current students and our alums than our alumni who are just rising stars in their professions. And there are so many of them. We're so fortunate today to have one of my good friends and Kelley alum from 2010, Adeela Johnson. She's had a wonderful career so far and is just on this great trajectory. And she's also just had so many interesting experiences along the way. So Adeela, thanks for joining us and thanks for joining me. And please, maybe you could just start off by just sharing a little bit about kind of your life story to this point following your MBA. Life story, not only professionally, but also personally.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I'm humbled at the opportunity and appreciate it. And always love reconnecting back with IU or Kelley in any way possible. So I'm happy to do it. Career. So I'll go maybe like a second back from MBA because it is relatively valuable in kind of my story. But I started my pre-MBA career in the financial industry. And why that's important is because it taught me a lot about what I wanted in a career, but more importantly, what I didn't want in a career, which is actually what sent me in to get an MBA, which was a career change. And Kelley, one of the reasons I picked Kelley was because it's such a good school to help kind of guide a career changing individual like myself. And I was in finance. I wanted to get into marketing, or so I thought. And I didn't quite know the way to go about doing it. And so an MBA served as a really good opportunity for me to kind of press pivot and be able to change courses with some guidance and education to help kind of nurture that interest. So when I joined Kelley, I was in the Consumer Marketing Academy with John Lee, who is still one of my favorite professors, and ended up joining kind of like a very typical path, I would say. My internship was at Kraft Foods, kind of realized actually like, this ABM route maybe isn't for me.
And ABM, assistant brand manager?
Assistant, yeah, associate. I think it's associate brand manager.
Yeah,
that I liked some pieces of it, but I wasn't sure. But that really left me confused because then I didn't quite know what I was going to do. And through the course of the interview process, which actually is a very intriguing and interesting process because you learn so much, I found Target. And for me, there was this kind of perfect melding of leveraging my past career, which was my financial background and the understanding of the way financials work, and then my interest in leadership and my interest in working in collaborative cultures, but mostly my interest in kind of having a more broad general management experience versus a very narrow focus. That was important to me because I wasn't 100% sure at the time what I wanted. So I wanted to set myself up in a way that I could end up going in a couple of different directions if that's, the way it needed to be. At the time, I was dating my now husband, and we were kind of pinging around the country prior to our MBA. So picking Minneapolis was not his first choice. But at the time I did it because kind of one of the pieces of advice I would give to young women is, focus on what's important to you at the time. And at the time, it was important for me to progress my career. And so I wanted to make a decision for my career, and then kind of other life circumstances would follow. So moved to Minneapolis. He eventually joined me in Minneapolis, and I spent 5.5 years at Target. Started in Minneapolis in the merchandising career and moved up into a senior leader position there. And then was kind of tapped on the shoulder to move to Toronto to help further the launch of the Toronto Canada platform within Target. Coincidentally, I also found out I was pregnant. I think my first day there was like August 30th, and I found out I was pregnant September 4th or something, like that. At which point I had been married in between those two dates. And I remember sitting down with my boss at the time, who had been a mentor of mine in Minneapolis. And, usually people don't tell their bosses they're pregnant when they're like 3 weeks in. But I was so shocked, and the timing couldn't have been worse, because I had just started this new, very demanding, high pressure job in another country. And I was about to tell them I was pregnant with my first child. And in Canada, the expectations for on maternity leave are a little different. Women take like a full year off. So I was
very, very European.
Very European. So I was very nervous, like, oh God, how am I going to tell them that they kind of made the wrong call here on me? So I sat down in my boss's office, and before I even got the words out, somehow he just knew. And there was nothing but support. It was so much excitement, so much support. And kind of time went on. And within 6 months of me moving there, my husband moving there, leaving his career, they decided to shut down Target Canada. And so I joined in September, and in January 15th exactly, they made the announcement to shut down the organization, and that kind of everyone local was being let go. And then all the expats were essentially going to be relocated back to Minneapolis, the ones that were offered positions back. By the time that time came, several months later, I was very pregnant, probably not in the best position to move. And my husband had just started kind of a 2-year commitment job in Canada. So I was a little bit stuck between a rock and a hard place. So accepted a very generous severance from Target and kind of parted ways and stayed in Canada. And I remember had my first son there, Noah. I remember this feeling of kind of loss, this immense feeling of loss, leaving a company that I think at the time I felt like I could have been with forever. And I loved the company. I valued the value systems there. I've always appreciated the leaders I've had, and I didn't really foresee me leaving. So there was, and now I'm left with a young child in a country that I can't work because I didn't have a work permit. And work is very important to me. And I didn't know my next step. And then as I started to kind of evaluate what was important to me and where I was in my life and career, priorities shifted. It wasn't just about me and my career and making the decision that I could make when I moved to Minneapolis. It was about this family that I was now building and what's right for my husband, what's right for my son, what's right for our lives. And I kind of, through a lot of thought and mentorship from a lot of different people, including a lot of my classmates, decided to not go back to kind of like big corporate America. And said, I think I'm going to go to a smaller organization where I can maybe have a little bit more impact at the ground level, but maybe also that can offer me some flexibility to be able to kind of, balance, quote unquote, this new life I have with work. So I ended up joining a startup organization in California. My husband, I gave him the choice of where we were going to move next, because he had kind of followed me around on several career moves. So he picked California. We moved to California. We didn't actually know what either of us were going to do. We just knew we wanted to be in California. And I ended up finding a job with a startup. It was called Cheeky at the time. And it was,
I'm sorry, Cheeky?
The name was Cheeky. In fact,
yeah. Okay.
what
I thought you did. But
yeah.
I wasn't sure. Yeah.
And it's interesting because that company has evolved so much, but at the time it was like a glorified private label for retailers. And the main retailer we were working with was Target. So I could leverage, a lot of these relationships that I had, and it proved to be really valuable having been on the retailer side of it. But what's interesting, I had this very false perception that if you join a small startup company, you get more flexibility. That's just not the case. It's quite the opposite, I would say, is that there's fewer resources. much higher demands. And so this question of balance actually became more challenging for me. I very soon was pregnant with my second. They were only 18 months apart. So it was very soon after I joined, again, in this very awkward situation where I'm joining a new company and like within a very short period of time telling them I'm expecting a child. But, it's interesting because I think those first couple of years at that company, which then evolved greatly. So from doing private label for retailers has now evolved into building influencer-led, like market changing brands, of which I lead one of them, Base. But in the time when I started there to now, which has been, I'm about to celebrate my 6-year anniversary at the company. I had 2 more children, so now I have 3. There's this big joke that Adeela took 2 maternity leaves within a year because I did like forward of 1 year and the back end of another. And it's true, I did. But as I grew at this company, it's been super interesting being at the grassroots of an organization because I have helped kind of build the culture of that company. And it's been really interesting because you juxtaposition that to like a Target that is very established in its culture and company, or even Ameriprise where I was before business school. And I see the value now in joining smaller organizations and having that impact. But then the lessons I learned from Target all helped me be successful.
Adeela, could you just would you remind me, but also mostly for our listeners, what's the scope of the company again? Just real briefly, the product lines and what do you actually do? What's a typical day?
Fair question. Well, different when I started to where I am now. So I'll speak a little bit more where we are now. So now the company, I would say, is kind of like a brand incubator. So the founders of the organization have seen the white space opportunity in developing brands that address a consumer need that is maybe not being addressed perfectly today. So in the travel space, which is the industry that I'm in, it was affordable, chic, and highly functional travel pieces or on-the-go pieces. So you have the Rimowas of the world, which are incredibly expensive. And then you have kind of like the private labels of the world, which fall apart like after one trip. So like, what's that perfect medium where you can get all 3? And all of the brands, there's 5 of them now, are primarily influencer-led. Which has kind of become the norm in many ways of building brands these days, but founded by an influencer, not just from a marketing angle, and built to kind of address these market needs. Heavily digitally native brands. So my brand is, 85+% D2C, and not as heavily focused on retail, which again, very different from the world of brands even 10 years ago when I was in business school. You learned all about how to address retailer needs. And very different from when I joined the company, which was a retailer brand. So it's evolved a lot in the 6 years I've been there. And so today the company builds these brands, and the long-term goal is to build them as self-sustaining individual brands that can then be, sold off to function on their own and then continue to innovate in that space through different partnerships.